Imagine you walk into a Rolex boutique, not a back alley, not a website, the real thing, marble floors, soft lighting, a person in a suit who smiles as you come in. You point at a stainless steel Submariner in the case. You have the money, cash, card, whatever they want, you are ready to buy it right now. And the person in the suit gives you a small, practiced, apologetic smile and says the words that confuse almost everyone the first time they hear them. I'm sorry, that one isn't available, there's a waiting list. And you say, fine, put me on it. And they say, well, it's not exactly a list, it's the most famous watch on the planet. A company that makes around 1 million of them every single year. And you, a paying customer, standing there with money in your hand, cannot buy one. Today, we're going to answer a question that sounds simple and absolutely is not. Why can't you just buy a Rolex? The real answer involves a secret foundation, a deliberate strategy hiding in plain sight, and an unwritten game that most buyers never even realize they're playing. Stay with me, because once you understand how this actually works, you will never look at that little crown the same way again. Let's start by killing the most common assumption, because it's wrong. When people hear you can't buy a Rolex, they picture some tiny, precious workshop, a handful of old men with loops, hand building a few hundred watches a year. That is not Rolex. Rolex is a giant. In 2025, Rolex did around $14 billion in sales. 14 billion. They make somewhere close to 1 million watches every year. They are, by themselves, responsible for roughly 1/3 of the entire Swiss watch industry's sales. One company, 1/3 of everything. So this is not a supply problem in the way you imagine it. It is not that they can't make enough. A company that size, with that money, could build a new factory. They could double production. They have chosen not to. In fact, here is the first detail that should make you sit up. In the last couple of years, as demand for Rolex hit the highest levels in the brand's history, as people lined up desperate to give them money, Rolex did the opposite of what any normal company would do. They cut production. 2 years in a row, fewer watches went out to stores, not more. Sit with that for a second. The demand goes up and the supply goes down on purpose. That is not an accident. That is a strategy. And to understand the strategy, you have to understand something almost nobody knows about. Who actually owns Rolex? Here is the secret hiding at the center of everything. Rolex is not a normal company. It is not on the stock market. You cannot buy a share of it. There is no billionaire owner cashing out, no board of investors demanding bigger numbers every 3 months. Rolex is owned entirely by a private charitable organization called the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, named after the man who founded Rolex over 100 years ago. When Wilsdorf's wife died and he had no children, he did something almost unheard of. He left his entire company, the whole thing, to a foundation. And that foundation has owned Rolex since 1960. Now, why does this matter to you? Standing in that boutique, unable to buy a watch, because a foundation does not think like a normal company. A normal company is under pressure. Sell more this quarter. Grow the numbers, make the investors happy. The Hans Wilsdorf Foundation has exactly 3 jobs, and they are written down: protect the independence of Rolex, safeguard the purity of the brand, and reinvest the profits back into the company. Nowhere on that list does it say sell as many watches as humanly possible. The foundation reportedly gives hundreds of millions to charity every year and pours the rest back in. So Rolex answers to no one. It has no shareholders to please, no quarterly panic, no reason on earth to chase short-term sales. It can afford to think in decades. It can afford to tell you, a customer with cash in hand, no. And that changes everything, because it means the scarcity you're experiencing is not a bug they're struggling to fix. It is a feature they are carefully protecting. So let's talk about that scarcity, because this is where it gets clever. Rolex builds a fixed number of watches to an extremely strict standard. And the demand for the most popular ones, the Steel Submariner, the Daytona, the GMT Master, wildly outpaces how many they make. When you have far more people wanting something than there are things to go around, you get a line. But Rolex does something specific with that gap between supply and demand. And it's genius in a slightly ruthless way. By keeping the supply just under the demand, always, forever, they do two things at once. First, they protect the mystique. A watch you can walk in and buy any day of the week is just a product. A watch that people wait years for becomes a trophy. The difficulty is the point. The struggle is part of what you're paying for. And second, and this is the big one, they keep the value up because there are never quite enough. A Rolex holds its price. Often it goes up. People don't just buy them. They hold them like little steel savings accounts. And that reputation that a Rolex is a safe place to park money drives even more demand, which makes them even harder to get, which makes them even more desirable. It's a loop, a perfect self-feeding loop. And Rolex, sitting there, owned by a foundation with no pressure and infinite patience, simply protects the loop and lets it spin. Now we get to the part that actually trips people up in real life, the waiting list. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. For the hardest to get models, at most stores, there is no real list. You imagine a queue, a ticket with a number. First come, first served, wait your turn, be a decent person, eventually you're up. That is not how it works. When you ask to be put on the list, in many cases, what's really happening is your name goes into a database. And when a watch finally comes in, the dealer looks at that database and they choose. They are not choosing the person who's waited longest. They are choosing the person they most want to sell it to. And who is that? It is the customer with a history. The person who has bought watches from that store before. The one who's spent real money there, who has a relationship with the staff, who the dealer believes is a serious, loyal client and not someone who'll flip the watch for profit the next day. So think about what that means. It's not really a waiting list at all. It is an audition. You walk in thinking you're a customer and you are actually being quietly evaluated. Are you the right kind of buyer? Have you earned it? And if you're a stranger off the street pointing at the single most requested watch they sell, the honest answer most of the time is no, not yet. Which brings us to the game, because people do get these watches. So how? There's an unwritten set of rules that regular buyers slowly figure out. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Rule 1, you almost never get the Grail watch first. You don't walk in cold and get handed a steel Daytona. Instead, you start with the watches Rolex makes plenty of, the ones that aren't in crazy demand. You buy one of those, you are, in effect, proving yourself. You're showing the dealer you're a real client, not a flipper. Rule 2, you build the relationship, you come back, you get to know the staff, you become a name they recognize, a face, a history in that database. And rule 3, you wait and you keep buying. And eventually, maybe when a coveted piece comes in, your name is the one they call. To an outsider, it looks insane. You have to spend money on other watches, sometimes for years, to earn the privilege of being allowed to spend more money on the one you actually wanted. But that is genuinely how a huge number of these watches change hands. It is a loyalty program dressed up as a luxury purchase, and Rolex officially will tell you none of this. It happens at the dealer level, quietly, in the gap between what's said and what's understood. But here's the thing, there is a place you can walk in today with no relationship, no history, no game, and buy that exact steel Submariner on the spot. It's called the grey market, and understanding it tells you everything about how real the scarcity is. The grey market is a network of dealers who are not official Rolex boutiques. They get their watches from people who did play the game, who bought at retail and are now reselling. And these dealers will absolutely sell you the watch you want immediately. There's just one catch, the price. On the grey market, that steel Submariner that Rolex prices at retail sells for well over 30% more. Some models are far worse. A popular GMT master, the one collector's nickname, the Batman, has sold for around $19,000, a premium of more than 60% over its official price. So let that land. The watch exists. It's available. You can hold it in your hand this afternoon. You simply have to pay thousands of dollars extra to a middleman for the crime of not wanting to wait years and audition for the privilege. That gap, the thousands of dollars between the retail price and what people actually pay, is the exact measurable size of the scarcity. It is the price of the line made visible. So is Rolex the villain here? It's tempting to say yes. that this is all a cynical manipulation, that they choke supply on purpose to jack up the mystique and let everyone else profit off the frenzy. And there's clearly truth in that. Cutting production while demand explodes is a choice, but it's more complicated than a simple con. Rolex would argue fairly that they refuse to lower their standards or flood the market just to chase a boom that might end, that they're protecting the long-term value of every watch already on a customer's wrist, that a Rolex means something precisely because they don't hand them out to everyone. And because that foundation owns them, they genuinely can think that way. They're not managing a quarter, they're managing a century. Whether that makes them principled guardians of a brand or the most patient scarcity machine ever built, honestly depends on where you're standing. And maybe it's both. So the next time you see that little crown on someone's wrist, understand what you're actually looking at. It's not just a well-made watch, though it is that. It's the visible tip of a 100-year strategy. A company owned by no one and answerable to no one that makes 1 million watches a year and still deliberately keeps them just out of reach. A waiting list, that's really an audition. A game most players don't know they're playing. And a scarcity so carefully maintained that it has its own price tag measured in the thousands on the grey market every single day. You can't just buy a Rolex, not because they can't make enough, but because the not being able to is the entire point. If this pulled back the curtain for you, there are dozens more stories hiding inside the watch world, and I tell a new one every week. Subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.